So I've just spent the weekend and tonight starting and finishing Bleach, or at least the first major arc, the Soul Society arc and the Substitute Soul Reaper arc that comes before that. I finally got around to it, and I just wanted to share my thoughts briefly. This isn't really a critique or even necessarily a review. I just wanted to talk about my thoughts coming off of it. Obviously, I've known about Bleach for a long time. Episodes of it as far back as Adult Swim and Toonami back in. But I never really got into it. I started it a few times, but I never got past a couple episodes of the Substitute Soul Reaper arc. There wasn't always necessarily a reason for that, but one reason was that I do watch in English, and Ichigo's voice actor Johnny Young Bosch also voices Lelouch Lamperouge in Code Geass, and so it was always a bit weird hearing Lelouch's voice coming out of Ichigo, who's a vastly different character. And so that was a barrier in the past, but I found that this time watching it, that wasn't really much of an issue. I almost didn't hear it at all. So I was able to really kind of remove that from the equation and just kind of absorb the show and the characters on their own. And ultimately, I mean, I enjoyed it. I did get a little bored for a couple episodes right about in the middle of all of it. But overall, I really enjoyed, especially the first half. I really thought that the Substitute Soul Reaper arc was consistently super enjoyable. Something new was always happening. They were always introducing new characters, and the characters were likable. I mean, I hesitate to say that every character, especially because there's a big cast. I mean, for for how relatively small the series is at this stage, it's a massive cast. So I hesitate to say that every character is necessarily complex, but I really enjoyed every character here ultimately, especially the main cast. Even if I feel like a lot of them got sidelined, I really enjoyed them when they were on screen, and I think Ichigo was a surprisingly enjoyable protagonist. He was kind of your typical shonen protagonist in that his power is basically just hitting things really hard and not giving up. And that's one of the problems I had with the show is that, to be honest, I thought the action was a little boring because it really focused on Ichigo and his boring powers too much. But he was just an enjoyable character because the particular way in which he kind of expressed those typical shonen tropes was really enjoyable. Comparing him to like Naruto, I just felt like he was a much more down to earth, relatable character compared to Naruto, who can be, especially in the beginning of like Naruto pre Shippuden, very kind of annoying, naive, very loud. Ichigo's not really these things. I mean, he can be aggressive and he can be confrontational with other guys, but that's always kind of fun and amusing when it happens because he's not always like that. Ichigo's like a pretty complex character, and I really enjoyed that out of a shonen protagonist. Uh, and his motivations are pretty straightforward and understandable. I mean, ultimately, he just wants to protect his friends and repay his debt. And it's never much more complicated than that. He has some doubt, but not a lot. It's never overwhelming. He is not liked by everybody, but he's not, um, super popular either. Or I guess those are the same thing. He's not either, like a social outcast or super popular. He's aggressive and kind of like very much punches his problems, but he's not stupid either. They make a point that Ichigo is pretty smart, or at least he works hard, he studies. So he breaks from a lot of those shonen tropes, and I enjoyed seeing those aspects shine through. And some of his powers could be a little interesting. I know a lot about Bleach from cultural osmosis, so knowing uh, that there are more elements to him that we haven't seen yet, or knowing elements that would be revealed, uh, like and I guess spoiler warning in the video title, but knowing that he has both the Soul Reaper, Quincy, and Hollow, all of these things inside of him that conflict is kind of interesting to see how he handles that. I really enjoyed. I was waiting for the Hollow to come out because I knew that it would, because that was kind of the Chekhov's gun of the season, as they kept building up to that. And so when it came out, it was enjoyable to see that. And then he actually regained control very quickly, and his reaction, I knew exactly what he would say when he came out of that, because his character had been so well established that I could predict exactly what he'd say. And I was right. He apologized. He said, "Sorry about that. I don't know what happened there, but let's get back to our fight. I don't know who that guy was, but that wasn't me." And even, Byakuya recognized, like, "Oh, I see. That's who I'm dealing with." And so I enjoyed that. But I look forward to seeing more of that in the future, because I know that the next big arc is about hollows, and so I imagine that's where we're going to explore more of Ichigo's hollow powers and where that'll come in. And maybe his power set will become a little bit more interesting. But like I said, one of my issues right now with the series is that I found the action scenes kind of boring overall. And that's where I lost interest a little bit in the middle, is that it was just kind of action. It was just a lot of combat back to back and not a whole lot of character stuff. What carried me through was the strength of these characters. I didn't care so much about them throwing their swords at each other. I was just interested in seeing the relationships develop between Renji and Ichigo, between um, Ichigo and Kenpachi, and these other characters. Uh, I did not. I was disappointed that even though they seemed in the first arc, they kind of built up the cast, Orihime and Uryu and Chad. They built these characters up as if they would be a major component. Like, this was Squad 7, this was the crew. But then they got there, and really, ultimately, none of them did anything. I mean, Oryu had his one fight with the one guy, the one real prick captain, who I can't remember his name, and I'm trying to find him on this massive cast list. Mayuri. The one really kind of just truly vile captain, aside from Aizen himself, and Gin, I guess. But Gin was. We'll talk about Gin. um, so that was cool. He had his moment to shine there as a Quincy. But Orihime and Chad really didn't do anything. I mean, I was very disappointed that they both kind of got very little to do. Chad did fight somebody. He did fight a captain briefly, and we got a flashback, but nothing was developed or interesting really happened with that. And Orihime did nothing. I don't. She didn't fight anybody, and I thought that was a huge shame, because she has the most interesting power. I mean, Chad's power is that he hits things really hard. Ichigo's power is that he hits things really hard. Uryu's power is that he hits things really hard with a bow. But Orihime's power is these weird fairies that have this kind of shield ability that is somehow applicable for offense, defense, and healing. That's super interesting, and they don't seem to be doing anything with it. And that's a shame, and I don't know why so many shows fall into this. This is a problem I have with all kinds of shows, not just anime, but like Invincible. When I watched Invincible, um, season 2, I had watched the Adam Eve special before that, and it was so much more exciting seeing Eve and her power used in so many cool and creative ways than it was watching Mark punch shit hard in season 2. It's so boring, characters who just punch real hard. And that's kind of the problem I have with the action in Bleach so far, is that there's nothing to it. It's all just spirit pressure. There's no real strategy or tactics or anything. It's just about somebody's spirit pressure. And whoever has the bigger spirit pressure wins. So it doesn't matter how hard Ichigo gets his ass kicked. As long as he can find some way to boost his spirit pressure at the last minute, he wins the fight, and then he gains that person's respect. It's very repetitive. It's very boring, and it became like a running joke that nobody died. Like, it's hilarious, actually, that I don't think anyone actually dies. I thought that somebody died, and maybe it's kind of a thesis statement that part of the plot of the Soul Society arc is that it's framed around a murder mystery. But the whole murder mystery was an illusion. It was fake. It never happened. Maybe that tells you exactly what Bleach is about, because I don't think anybody dies. I thought Aizen had killed Toshiro. I mean, I thought Momo was gone. I thought she was dead, but it seems like she's probably not dead. I thought Toshiro was dead, and he's okay. I mean, everybody survived on both sides just so that they can all be friends in the end. And I don't necessarily have a problem with that, because I think it's clear that Bleach was meant to be a long-running show, and so they wanted to do a lot with it. I don't think you should just kill characters off for shock value or because you need to. I think that's wasteful. But it did become a running joke how, like, Renji in particular, I think, would just constantly die over and over to anybody that he fought. I mean, Byakuya did this to him, and then Aizen did this to him, and they just survive. I mean, it's no matter what happens, people just don't die. And so it makes me wonder, like, what does it take to kill somebody? I don't really understand. So between the battles being nothing but spirit pressure and the fact that I knew nobody was ever actually in any real danger, and Ichigo especially had all kinds of plot armor because he always had a trump card to play at any given time, it made the fights themselves have very little stakes, and there was nothing of interest to hold me through. And they never used any of the other characters. I mean, I would have had some investment in seeing how Orihime or Chad would have made it through a fight, but I don't ever get to see that. But again, because I enjoyed all of these characters on both sides, I really enjoyed the series anyway. This series carried by the strength of its characters. Even the side characters who don't get much attention, I think, they were all recognizable, and they all had enough of a show of character to make them distinct. And I may not remember all of their names because of how big of a cast this is, but I did get a distinct impression of everyone's personality. And this is a long-running series, so I know, or at least I hope, that a lot of these characters are going to be fleshed out and expanded on as we go. And so I'm looking forward to seeing that. And the characters who did make the most impression were really good characters, like Ichigo. Ichigo's a really good character. I actually really like Orihime too. As far as a female lead in a shonen goes, I think she's pretty good. I hope she's used well, but I hear maybe she doesn't get used super well. But I think she is a pretty good character. She is the heart of the group, as is pretty typical, but she's also like, and this is something I appreciate about most of the cast, is that everyone's just really willing to take action. Uh, Orihime is clearly unprepared for a lot of this stuff, but at no point is she ever really frightened or scared to step forward, defend herself, defend her friends. She's always eager to jump in and try to contribute in some way as much as she can. And I appreciate that, as opposed to her needing to have an arc. You think about Sakura and Naruto and how we had to go through like 60 episodes before she decided, like, oh, I'm going to do something. And then she kind of just ends up never doing anything anyway. That was disappointing. But I don't get that here. Orihime is always ready to go from moment one. And so we don't need to waste time with that. And so even if she doesn't end up doing something, I'm not necessarily going to hold it against her. Like, she's trying her best. And she's charming besides. She is kind and compassionate, but she's also quirky. The random, like, narcoleptic fits that she has where she'll be talking about something and then she'll just go off into some kind of dream world momentarily. I find that hilarious. It's always funny when it happens. The show is very funny in its humor. When Ichigo does get into these fights with, like, Renji or someone else, or when Orihime does have those little moments, I always appreciate it. It's not overused or overdone. I think it's done well enough and sparingly enough that it really does bring levity and just charm to help endear you to these characters at the right moments. Uh, you know, Oryu was good. I actually thought he would start off. I thought he was a dick, and I thought I would not like him because he was such a dick. But ultimately, I did kind of get where he was coming from, and I liked that he was also a complex character because he had a good motivation, and he realized what I appreciated a lot about when we learned about his backstory is that there was the story about the Quincy's and the Soul Reapers, and when you hear that story, your first implication would be, oh, okay, so clearly he just thinks the Soul Reapers are dicks because they wiped out the Quincy's. But then when he talks about it, he's like, no, no, no. Actually, I kind of agree with the Soul Reapers. The Quincy's were out of line, which kind of lines up with what we understand about the Quincy's. Now, I don't know how true that is, because the Soul Reapers are clearly not perfect at all. Although I understand that the current arc is about fighting some Quincy, so maybe the Soul Reapers were onto something back then. I'm not sure, but I appreciated that. And then he had this complex motivation about it was really about his grandfather, and he even though his grandfather had really pushed for him to work with Soul Reapers, he was consumed by revenge for a while. And so his resolution was realizing he'd been consumed by revenge and resolving to actually honor his grandfather's wishes. I thought that that was nice. Similarly, Byakuya was a compelling character because I wanted to know the whole time, like, what was his motivation for being so insistent on executing Rukia and his sister? Why was he so dead set on this? Because I didn't think he was just evil. I didn't think he was just a dick for being a dick's sake. I knew there had to be some reason for it, and I wanted to know. I was compelled, and I got the impression that it was some kind of code of honor. So when we learned that that's exactly what it was, that he was caught between two vows that he had made, and ultimately he just had to choose one, and he chose the opposite one as Ichigo, um, or that a lot of people chose. I'm not necessarily gonna give him a free pass for being such a monster, but I recognize that that is compelling enough. I understand how he may have come to that conflict. And on its face, I actually respect his ideology. If the people at the top don't follow the rules, if the people who enforce the rules don't follow them, how can they expect anyone else to follow the rules? That ideology is really good. And that's kind of the problem with our society, is that that's not how anybody works. The people at the top in the real world don't follow the rules, right? So it's a noble, admirable ideology. And in fact, if you took these things in isolation, Ichigo's ideology of, no, we have to break the rules for the people who matter to us and for the special people. Again, if you take those things in isolation, Ichigo would be the bad guy because he's trying to skirt the system for just his friends or people that he cares about. But it's when we look at these personal levels that we realize it's not that simple, and when we take into the fact something that I think everyone in the Soul Society realizes by the end is that the system was corrupt. I think the system was probably not great before Aizen decided to take over. I distinctly get that impression. Although it's difficult to say because as we learn, almost every fucked up thing that happens that we see is a direct result of everything Aizen has done. All of the decisions were Aizen's fault. Um, so it's hard to judge exactly. But I don't think that kind of blind adherence to the rules is good either. I think, the balance is somewhere to be found in the middle. But it's a compelling ideology. So I understood even him for being, kind of the monster that he is. Um, I don't know Aizen's motivation at this point. I thought it, I was I didn't expect his reveal to happen the way that it did. I thought he would kind of show up in like the middle of a fight or something. I didn't expect his reveal to be a little bit more subtle. But something that was interesting for me is that obviously I knew going in Aizen was the bad guy. I knew that he was behind a lot of this. I didn't know exactly the details of his plan, but I knew that ultimately Aizen was the bad guy, that he was scheming behind the scenes. So for me, it was interesting to watch everything take place, knowing that Aizen was manipulating everyone and everything around him. Especially his scenes with Momo, really dark. This guy's super twisted. To actively see his manipulations taking place in real time is really wild. That's an interesting way to view the series. And I think maybe almost the better way to view the series, because I don't think there's any way to predict that Aizen's the bad guy. I don't think that would have been a reasonable thing to conclude or to predict in any way, especially because his power is such an asshole. But watching it, knowing that, really kind of added to my experience, because those scenes that otherwise it's kind of a double rug pull, you know, when Momo and him have that scene in his room on a first viewing, if you don't know, that's a setup for killing Aizen. They're like, okay, they're developing this character a little bit. They're developing him as a nice guy so they can kill him, so that you care and that you feel bad for Momo. But it's a double rug pull, because no, Aizen's actually the bad guy, and that was just a manipulation tactic for the audience and for Momo. So that's kind of an interesting way to view the series, and I enjoyed being able to have that perspective. Similarly, I also knew, obviously, about Yoruichi. And so I enjoyed that too, is knowing, you know, who Yoruichi was and seeing how long they carried through with Yoruichi just being a cat. That was super interesting, how long they spent with Yoruichi being this mysterious cat that they don't do a lot with, but clearly knows a lot, has a lot of connections, is very powerful. And in the intro, one of the intros, they show a scene of someone attacking one of our characters, and Yoruichi as a cat, like in a swift motion, bites off and steals a part of that person's blade. And this never happens in the show, but that little clip again kind of reinforces there's something really cool and mysterious about Yoruichi. And then, ironically, I think that same intro starts the trend of the episode focusing on that really funny picture of like Yoruichi in cat form pointing at herself for some reason in a really comical way. I thought that was really funny. So actually seeing the reveal happen and getting to see Yoruichi's backstory and her relationship with Soifone, I enjoyed that. I, I will not lie, Yoruichi was a massive part of why I decided to watch this series, because I've always been vaguely aware of her, but I started seeing some of her in action and some of her scenes, and I really like Yoruichi. She's great. So actually seeing her in action was great. I gotta say, I think she was fucking around a lot in that battle with Soifone. I don't know what her plan was, because she was kind of getting her ass kicked, and it really seemed like she was walking that line there. Like, Soifone was about to kill her. She was really threading that needle, and I don't know what her plan was. Uh, and I'm not even entirely sure that I get or really believe the resolution to that conflict necessarily, but it was a badass reveal of Soifone being, hey, I'm busting out this technique that's so new, I haven't even named it yet. And Yoruichi says, that technique, actually, here's its name, I named it. That's my technique that I never showed you. That's a hell of a reverse Uno card to play. Uh, that was hilarious, and I really enjoyed that, just to show how powerful she is. But again, even though I thought she was threading that needle in the fight, there was still no stakes, because I knew, like, okay, she might be presented as the underdog right now, but I know she's got an ace. I know she's got a reverse card. Somewhere, we're just waiting for her to pull it. But it was a hell of a reverse card to pull, you know? So I enjoyed that. Uh, Even a lot of the other minor characters who didn't do a whole lot, I mean, I think they all left kind of a distinct impression. And I have to say, I don't think there were any characters I did not like. Uh, I enjoyed every character, even the super minor characters. I enjoyed Cone. I thought Cone was charming. Um, I enjoyed, what was his name? Oh God, what's his name? I can't remember at the moment. Don Hanonji. Yeah, Don Hanonji. I really enjoyed him. Although I will say there was one filler episode too many in this series. I had to skip past the second one. I enjoyed the first one with him and the kids, because that was really hilarious, and I thought it was well timed where it came in the episodes. But when that second one showed up, right after we got Rukia's backstory, I was not interested in that. I had to skip past that episode. But I actually really enjoy him. I enjoy Ichigo's whole family. I really enjoy all of them. I think they're super well done. Karin especially is awesome to watch. I already know that there's more going on with his dad. so it's going to be interesting to see that develop. Um, I enjoyed Tatsuki, his childhood friend. Kokaku, I mean, she gave me super Biken vibes from Guilty Gear. I'm sure that archetype has, it's not a, that's just my reference for it, but I'm sure that archetype is in many things, but that's who I related her to. I just really enjoyed this cast. But I this is a long series. I mean, I got through the 63 some episodes over these last 3 days, but I don't think I can keep watching right away. I would like to see more of, what happens with the Hollows in the next arc. But the next arc seems pretty long. I mean, I think it is basically just one more arc, and it's almost 200 episodes dealing with these Hollows and Aizen. I don't know if I have it in me, especially if the action does not improve. Uh, just because I don't think I can deal with this spirit pressure thing anymore. I'm glad that I watched it. I enjoyed what I watched. I have a good understanding of Bleach now. But the spirit, I think the action is the weakest part of the show, which is disappointing. I think it gets characters really right. I think it gets humor really right. And I want to give some credit to the Soul Society arc in general, because I think the plot here and juggling as many characters as it does is really impressive. Uh, I never really understood how they managed to do this, but seeing it play out, while I don't think it's perfect, I think the way they played out this Soul Society arc of having Ichigo and Cast infiltrate while at the same time a conspiracy and infighting is happening among the Soul Society, having that dual dynamic made it super interesting. As opposed to this just being, a boss rush where they have to go through and fight every captain of the Soul Society. Even though logically maybe that's kind of what it should have been, and it's weird that a lot of there's like 30 captains and lieutenants, and Ichigo and crew only fight a handful of them, right? It's kind of weird that's how it plays out, but ultimately for the story, I think it was way more interesting that way to see all of these different interactions and just pick the handful of people who had the most interesting interactions with Ichigo. Like, I don't think it would have been that interesting to see Ichigo fight Toshiro, but seeing Toshiro like lead the investigation into this conspiracy, that was very interesting. And so I found Toshiro compelling in a way I wouldn't have if he was just a fucking boss fight. So I think that was really well written. So if the other arcs are also like this, that's impressive. I think they get the writing right, the characters right, the humor right, but I just think the action's kind of boring. I hope that future arcs put more emphasis on the other characters, and now it's a huge roster of characters. There's a lot of characters now, and a lot of these characters do have some very interesting Zanpakuto, some very interesting Bankais. We haven't even seen all of them. I would very much like to see what these characters are capable of. We never really got to see Rukia do anything. I hope Rukia gets a big focus in the next episode, because she was the damsel in distress for most of this. I hope she gets to do something now. She gets her time to shine, to see, because apparently she's one of the best Soul Reapers. That's what we were told. I want to see that. I'd like Orihime to do something. I'd like Isha to do something. I'd like Chad to do something. I think Renji can take a backseat. I think Renji's done enough. I think he's earned his place. I would very much like to see some of these other characters enter the fray and do some interesting stuff. I don't just want this to be the Ichigo show, because I think that's a boring way to do your shonens. But overall, I really enjoyed the first season of Bleach, the first arc of Bleach, the first two arcs. And I'm happy I watched it. I look forward to eventually watching more of Bleach. Thanks for watching.